Thank you everyone for joining us. We will be starting the program in just a moment. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today to release ArtsFund's COVID Cultural Impact Study, a new comprehensive statewide look at the impacts of the pandemic on nonprofit cultural organizations throughout the state of Washington and the communities they serve. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Sidman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Communications at ArtsFund. I am a light-skinned white woman with long brown hair, wearing a darkish top and silver jewelry, sitting in front of a corner with brightly colored art behind me. As we begin today's event, I would like to acknowledge that the city of Seattle, where ArtsFund is based, is on the occupied lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the ancestral land of the Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish tribes, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Many with us today are on different territories, and we join you in honoring and recognizing those. To make today's event more accessible to those of differing abilities, an ASL interpreter is with us, and you can enable automatically generated captions. Please note those subtitles are automatic, so may not be 100% accurate. We have also invited all our speakers to visually describe themselves, as I did. Today's event will feature perspective and data shared by ArtsFund leaders Sung Yang and Michael Greer. This will be followed by remarks offering insight from Eastern Washington by Melissa Huggins, Executive Director at Spokane Arts. We will then move into a panel discussion with leaders of 3 organizations featured as case studies in the report. After the panel, we'll bring back all the speakers and open it up for your questions. So please use the Q&A box throughout the program to submit them. Before I dive in, I offer a brief overview of the study's methodology. The COVID Cultural Impact Study uses several data sources: a nonprofit organizational survey of 212 cultural organizations across Washington state, a cultural participant survey of 737 adults who attended at least one Washington nonprofit cultural program since the pandemic began, and a statewide omnibus poll, which sampled 874 individuals representative of all Washington residents. We also profile 5 case studies, some of whom you will hear from today. Data collection began in the spring of 2021 and concluded in early fall of 2021. So this is new information. The study is authored by Burke Consulting with research collaboration by GMA Research and Dr. William Byers from the University of Washington. In addition to this phenomenal set of research partners, the study was guided by a cross-sector statewide advisory committee, inclusive of representatives from the public, private, philanthropic, and cultural sectors. The report was designed by the incredible creative team at Dapper and Associates. Many thanks to all involved. And special thanks to Katie Corella and Steffi Morrison on the ArtsFund staff for their invaluable contributions to every aspect of this report. We could not do this work without the support of our sponsors. The COVID Cultural Impact Study is funded by Bank of America, the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, and the Nesholm Family Foundation. In a moment, you'll hear from Brian Winike, Bank of America Private Bank Market Executive, the study's chief sponsor and community conversation sponsor. His remarks will be followed by a stirring dance compilation from Whim Seattle Contemporary Dance, with voiceover by artistic director Olivier Weavers. All the footage you'll see has been generated during the pandemic. Following the performance, ArtsFund's board chair, Sung Yang, will launch us into the findings themselves. So I now turn the program over to Brian Winike from Bank of America. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hi, my name is Brian Winike, and I'm the Managing Director and the Private Bank Market Executive at Bank of America. And my pronouns are he, him. I'm a white male with light brown hair, and I'm wearing a light blue patterned shirt with a navy blue sport coat. I'm doing this presentation from my living room in Madrona, and I will confess that since I am at home, I'm wearing slippers instead of my normal work shoes. Equally as important, for over 10 years, I have had the pleasure of serving on the board of trustees of the Seattle Art Museum. I'm excited that Amada Cruz will be on today's panel. I would like to start off by thanking Michael Greer and the ArtsFund team for all their hard work in moving this event forward. Your passion is evident, and I know we're all looking forward to hearing more about the crucial role that patrons of the arts can play as we work together to recover from the pandemic. At Bank of America, our support of the arts is designed to help economies thrive, educate, and enrich societies, and create greater cultural understanding. The last 2 years have been particularly challenging, and my teammates and I have spent a great deal of time listening to our arts partners, understanding the obstacles they continue to navigate in the face of the pandemic. What we learned was that to be an advocate of the arts and the cultural sector meant remaining steadfast in our support. Therefore, we fulfilled all of our commitments, whether or not they were open, programming had been canceled, digitized, or even postponed. This includes paying full stipends to all of our Museums on Us partners, rescheduling loans of our art collection through our Art in the Communities program, and repurposing our Bank of America Art Conservation Project funding to support the general operating needs of our partners. We also learned the importance of arts innovation. In January of 2021, Bank of America launched Masterpiece Moment, a new digital series celebrating great works of art from museums across the country. Each video hosted by a leading museum director shares insights and commentary on a piece they have selected from their collection. Here in Seattle, Bank of America partnered with the Seattle Art Museum to highlight Hokusai's Five Beautiful Women. Painted in 1810, Five Beautiful Women features women of different social backgrounds in an intriguing hierarchy and differentiated by their clothing. Their garments and accessories prompt us to consider clothing and its relationship to our identity. Paintings like Five Beautiful Women demonstrate how the arts help create cultural understanding and the importance of us all coming together to help the arts flourish here in the Puget Sound. On behalf of my 2,000 Bank of America teammates that call the Puget Sound home, thank you for attending this afternoon's event and for your commitment in building community through the arts. I will now turn it over to an arts moment. Thank you.
It is no secret that the past 2 years have been challenging for performing artists. Not being able to perform live has been maddening. We've learned patience and humility. We have questioned our purpose and viability over and over. While resilience is the word that has been used many times to describe how artists have responded, I think it is passion and grit that keeps us going. Artists continue to demonstrate that creativity and imagination will triumph over adversity. With our community as partners, we have kept on innovating and discovered new ways to connect and spark empathy. Together, we are stronger than we think. While we don't know yet when this pandemic will be over, we know that nothing will ever stop artists from creating and unmasking fresh horizons.
Thank you to Whim and all of the artists involved for that wonderful compilation and performance. Hello, everyone. My name is Sung Yang, and I am the board chair of ArtsFund. My pronouns are he, him. I'm Korean American and wearing a rust-colored sweater with shaggy pandemic hair that's long overdue for a cut, and I'm seated in my home office. You know, for nearly half a century, ArtsFund's mission has been to strengthen community through the arts. We provide grants and organizational support to the nonprofit arts sector. But beyond the financial support, ArtsFund also undertakes important research to tell the story of how the arts produces beneficial impacts that reach far beyond the cultural sector. For example, we've shown through our periodic economic impact studies how the arts supports tens of thousands of jobs, attracts tourists, and generates over $2 billion in annual business right here in our region. But beyond the economic benefits, we also know the arts have an impact on the health and well-being of our broader community. And so we conducted the first of its kind in the nation to research the social impact of the arts. But to be honest, we never envisioned we would have to conduct research related to an unprecedented global pandemic and how such a societal challenge would not only have far-reaching consequences, but would also permanently alter the manner in which arts are conducted. Today, we present to you that research and story. Beginning April 2020 to March 2021, we released quarterly COVID arts sector impact snapshots throughout the pandemic's first year. This COVID cultural impact study we're releasing today provides new data and a more comprehensive statewide look on impacts and future trends. Because we know Washington's cultural organizations have been deeply impacted by the pandemic. In many instances, our venues and performance halls were the first to close and the last to reopen. We also know arts and cultural organizations require our sustained support in order to fully recover and move on to what's next. Our shared work to support and revitalize impacted institutions, artists, and cultural sector workers in the coming weeks and months will be integral to our own region and state's pandemic recovery. You know, the arts have survived global wars, the Black Plague, the Dark Ages, even totalitarianism. So I feel confident in saying we will survive this pandemic. But there are profound impacts rippling through the sector, and at ArtsFund, we are committed to understanding and sharing this research so that when we recover, we will come out stronger and be even more resilient. So thank you all for joining us today. And with that, I would like to introduce ArtsFund's fearless leader and CEO, Michael Greer.
Thank you so much, Sung, for your service to ArtsFund, to the sector, and to the entire community. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michael Greer. I use he, him pronouns, identify as a light-skinned Black male. I have no hair, a mustache, and glasses, and I'm wearing a blue dress shirt and sitting in front of a window to my garden. At ArtsFund, our mission is to support the arts through leadership, advocacy, and grant making in order to build a healthy, equitable, and creative Washington. Our COVID cultural impact study sets a new benchmark for the state of arts and culture and provides stakeholders with a reliable set of data from which to make future decisions. Washington's cultural institutions have been significantly impacted as a result of this pandemic. Revitalizing these institutions will be an integral part of our state's recovery. In fact, our statewide poll of Washingtonians confirmed that over half of those surveyed felt that cultural nonprofit organizations will play an important role in the state's pandemic recovery. This study is meant to highlight the state of the sector, the community's reaction to that state, and make data-driven suggestions on how to move forward. The 121 organizations that participated in this study saw a 21% decline in revenue. a loss of $95.9 million in revenue in 2019-2020 alone. This sample saw an additional 60% reduction in earned revenue in 2020-2021. Leaders are expecting several years, assuming no new significant shocks, to recover to 2018-2019 levels. This has led to hundreds of millions of dollars that has left the sector and our communities in the forms of jobs, educational opportunities, and local business support. 41% of the organizations participating in this study had furloughed staff or reduced hours and/or pay. 41%, at a time when the economic stability of many families was becoming increasingly more fragile. COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and its effects on cultural organizations has also been acute. While BIPOC identifying organizations saw an uptick in contributed revenue in 2020, those gains were projected to be wiped out in 2021 and lead to total contributed income below 2019 numbers. In addition, BIPOC identifying organizations in our sample tend to be smaller in budget size, and our study showed that smaller budget size organizations accessed fewer relief funding sources from state, county, and federal programs, only compounding the issue. It is also important to note that the top 3 sources of relief dollars accessed by our survey organizations were all public funding. Public funding was essential to the survival of this sector. That level of support must continue throughout this recovery. At the time of collection, 56% of cultural participants responded that the earliest they planned to return to in-person events was spring of 2022, or that they could not be certain when they would be ready to return. Mask and safety policies, along with vaccination status, topped their factors of whether and when they would return to in-person events. However, this same group said that when they did return to in-person events, they would do so less frequently and estimated that they would spend about half of what they spent prior to the pandemic. At a time when relief funding is diminishing and reserve funds have been spent down, patrons are signaling that there will continue to be a 50% reduction in earned income in the foreseeable future. A positive finding shows that across all organizations, the majority made pivots to offer significantly more digital programming and establish or expand remote work possibilities. Nearly 2/3 of organizations said that those changes would remain permanent. In addition to increased remote access to programming, 55% of participating organizations said that they had or are planning to make other accessibility improvements. The takeaway here is that COVID has placed an urgency on creating more accessible ways to interact with arts and cultural programming. If these changes do continue, we expect to see broader access and more diverse audiences in the future. We are not at the tail end of a pandemic. Instead, we are at the beginning of a structural transformation. If we can learn from the past 2 years and make the necessary changes, this transformation will see our sector become more diverse, more accessible, and more financially stable. ArtsFund is making 5 key recommendations based on these findings to make that future possible. The recommendations are applicable to government and policymakers, community and cultural organizations, private and corporate funders, individual cultural participants, and our partner sectors. First, we must reimagine the role of arts and culture in our communities. 50% of Washingtonians see cultural institutions as a key part of community recovery. The arts are essential to community health and play an economic and social role in the quality of life for our citizens. Second, we must sustain and expand the public support for the arts that we saw through pandemic relief efforts. Federal relief efforts provided dollars to the sector at scales that private or corporate philanthropy cannot begin to match, allowing these sectors to remain intact. Recovery requires institutionalizing these public relief programs. Third, we need to protect the cultural workforce. This includes artists, administrators, stagehands, builders, and the multitude of adjacent industries that provide cleaning and janitorial, building maintenance, and other services. We must invest in wages and training programs to retain and grow this critical cultural labor force. Fourth, none of these initiatives will work without centering equity in everything that we do. Arts and culture should be accessible and equitable to all people. There is no way for our industry to grow without incorporating new audiences and new participants by reducing barriers to participation like funding, digital access, youth, disability services, and more. And finally, we need to support the long-term adaptation of the industry. With COVID-19, our future was delivered to us overnight, but that does not mean that we can change overnight. The process of adapting to, investing in, and normalizing these changes will take time. I have no doubt that our community will support arts and culture as we embark on this journey. After nearly 2 years since the first case of COVID was detected in Washington state, the arts and culture sector has been irrevocably changed. The sector's vulnerabilities were exposed, and at the same time, cultural organizations have demonstrated what they bring to a community in crisis. Now is the moment to support this sector so that it can continue to support all of us. Thank you all for attending. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Melissa Huggins, Executive Director of Spokane Arts. Melissa?
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Huggins, Director of Spokane Arts. I'm speaking to you from the unceded land of the Spokane people, the traditional homelands of the 4 bands of the Spokane tribe. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with brown hair. Today, I'm wearing a black turtleneck and I'm seated in front of a bookshelf. I'm grateful to be here today to offer one perspective on how the pandemic has uniquely impacted Eastern Washington. And you'll find more Eastern Washington perspectives within the report. A deep and sincere thank you to ArtsFund and all who worked on the report for including organizations statewide in this work. Spokane Arts is a nonprofit organization that supports arts and culture in the Inland Northwest through grant making, arts programming, advocacy, and professional development. We foster creativity by providing direct resources to the creative sector, and we shine the spotlight on local arts and culture to ensure everyone in our region has an opportunity to make, learn, play, and engage. Spokane Arts experience during the pandemic has essentially felt like sprinting through back-to-back marathons, and we're still going. Like many organizations in Eastern Washington, we have a tiny staff and we're supported by incredible volunteers on our governing board and on the Spokane Arts Commission. With their help, we were able to jump into action immediately in March 2020. We did 5 times as much grant making as we do in a normal year without any additional staff. We tripled our advocacy workload. Like our counterparts across the state, we pivoted and innovated and shifted to online. And amidst everything else, our public art workload continued. We've continued to beautify and activate public spaces by installing murals, basketball court murals, utility box wraps, and sculpture projects. We've commissioned new portable work for 6 library branches, commissioned designs for 32 bus rapid transit stations, and much more. That's a slice of what we were able to do using funding allocated pre-pandemic, not including the many, many projects we had to put on hold or cancel. Like creative organizations across the state, we continued to serve our community in spite of all the challenges illustrated in the report. But behind the data, there's a deeply human side to this work. Our team, just like cultural organizations across the state, does this work because we care about community. And we knew how important it was for people to find meaning, connection, and hope during a series of national crises. As we're approaching year 3 of the pandemic, cultural workers are depleted. And it's hard to admit because it's so ingrained in us that the show must go on with a smile, no matter what. But creatives are exhausted in a way I've never seen before. We have to be honest about that and figure out how to fix it moving forward, because Washington State will suffer if we experience a creative brain drain. However, what the cultural sector has been able to accomplish despite everything we've faced is awe-inspiring. Throughout the report, there are examples of how artists found new ways to connect with audiences, create mutual aid, comfort people, spread public health messaging, and more. That work is needed more than ever, and our state has an opportunity to invest strategically in the future. Right now, Washington is ranked 45th in the nation in per capita arts spending, and data in the report illustrates that access to relief funding was not equal across the state. Eastern Washington was not able to access as much funding or as many sources of funding as other areas. Now is the time to remedy that, and as Michael said, enact transformational change. My hope is that local, regional, and state leaders in both the public and private sector are spurred by this report to treat the creative sector as the economic linchpin it is, a crucial driver of tourism and tax revenue, key to recruiting students and businesses, and a partner in education, mental health, and community well-being. Thank you for your time, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Melissa. Now I invite the panelists to join me on the screen, and we will turn to a discussion with leaders from 3 of the case study organizations featured in the report. I am honored to be joined today by Monique Courcy, Executive Director of TeenTix, Amada Cruz, the Illsley Nordstrom Ball Director and CEO of the Seattle Art Museum, and Tim Lennon, the Executive Director of LANGSTON. A reminder to all of you joining us today, if you have questions for the panelists or for ArtsFund, please submit them in the Q&A feature during the conversation. So thank you, panelists, for joining me today, joining all of us. I would like to invite you for the first question to please introduce yourselves, give a brief introduction to your organization, and then share with us a few of the pandemic impacts that your organization faced. And let's go in alphabetical order. Let's start with Monique to Amada to Tim.
To go first. Hello, everybody. My name is Monique Courcy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director at TeenTix. I just want to thank you all for being here and also for the opportunity to introduce myself and to talk about TeenTix. I am a white woman of Hispanic heritage with reddish brown hair, and today I'm wearing a dark colored pattern top, and I'm seated at my dining table in front of some of my pandemic plant babies behind me and my front entryway. So TeenTix is a youth-centered organization. Our programs work to empower teens through arts engagement, encouraging them to take an active role in shaping our communities. So we offer youth access to these opportunities through $5 tickets with a TeenTix pass, in addition to arts leadership and arts media and criticism programs. So some pandemic impacts. The most immediate shift we saw during pandemic was when our community went into lockdown. We had to shift our cornerstone program, the TeenTix Pass program, which typically facilitated the sale of $5 tickets to our arts and community partner events. And of course, these were live. So our most recent tally had actually shown that teens have purchased over 130,000 tickets to events in our community through this program. And COVID really shifted what we were able to accomplish through the past program. So while we were eventually able to start directing young people to virtual events, in order to decide what to do in the meantime, we actually went to our teens for guidance. So for us, building programming around what teens said they needed and wanted was really our priority, and ensuring that they had the tools that they needed to access the activities virtually was obviously a must. And we were not alone in this. Youth workers found ourselves driving around, delivering care packages, computers, and other tech needs for virtual participation to our youth. And in the meantime, teens told us at TeenTix that they were interested in programming that helped them process and engage with social justice movements like Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate, as well as things that supported their mental health. So we created new opportunities for conversation, processing, and practice. We invited teens to Zoom with arts leaders, developed virtual workshops for teens, focused on arts as activism, led by local artists of color. We connected teen writers with publications like the Seattle Times to write about their own experiences, attending protests and how these movements impacted them personally. And we worked with an amazing youth-led organization called the Colorization Collective. You should check them out if you have not heard of them already, to pilot a new program called MTAC, Mentorship for Teen Artists of Color, where we pair young artists of color with adult mentors of color to help hone their craft. I think I'll stop here and let Amada take it from here.
Thank you, Monique. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Yes, my name is Amada Cruz. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Illsley Ball Nordstrom Director and CEO of the Seattle Art Museum. I am a light-skinned Cuban-American woman with short salt and pepper hair, a little more salt than pepper after COVID. Today, I am wearing a light blue shirt and a dark blue blazer. I'm seated in front of a white wall with an office chair, desk, computer, and framed photograph behind me. It's Sam, just like I think with everyone else, the pandemic came fast and hard, and we were not prepared. Within 24 hours, we had shut down our two venues, indoor venues to the public, kept the sculpture park open, and we had to pivot to online programming. We had almost 300 employees that were actually all of a sudden having to work from home. And as I remind everybody, Sam is not a tech company, so that was not so easy. But we learned a lot from that experience, and I think you'll probably hear from my colleagues about that as well. Internally, we focused like a laser on mitigating the financial impacts of the pandemic. Now, you have to understand that SAM has very high fixed costs because we run two separate museum buildings, quite big ones, and we also run a sculpture park with a smaller building. So when you have to look for cost savings, you have some very fixed costs that you can't really go after, let's say. So we deployed every possible strategy. We looked at budget cuts. We had made salary adjustments starting from the top. We embarked upon an emergency relief fundraising campaign. We fundraised from out-of-state foundations. And the worst thing we found that we had to do after several months was enact some staff furloughs and then some layoffs. Of course, the most painful part of all of this. Through all of this, we really tried to keep a focus on equity and increased that work in 4 specific areas. Like many of you, I'm guessing SAM is only now really gradually emerging from the worst effects of the pandemic. And I have to say, we thought the light was at the end of the tunnel until Omicron hit. So it feels like we're moving backwards a bit. But I have to admit that I know that we at SAM are actually very fortunate because the organization had a very, very healthy foundation before the pandemic. So we are very lucky. And now we're asking ourselves what kind of organization we need to be as we emerge. And we know that we want to be part of the revitalization of our 3 neighborhoods, especially downtown. And we know that we really want to help rebuild those human connections that we've lost during the closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Amada. I'm Tim Lennon, he, him pronouns, representing LANGSTON in Seattle Central District. I'm a Black man with a beard, no hair, glasses, wearing a gray shirt, and I'm meeting you all from my office with several posters of past programs from LANGSTON here behind me. LANGSTON, like everybody else you just heard from, had a rough go of it in 2020 and since in a lot of ways. In March of 2020, we had to cancel all of our programming. We're essentially a presenting organization. So the foundation of our business model is having people in the same room, watching art and breathing the same air. And that was the one thing we all knew we couldn't do in 2020. And so canceling all of our programming for 2020 was heartbreaking. It's not just the thrill of the show, but it's knowing that all the artists that we employ and all of the tech workers, the tech folks that we engage to put on the productions don't have income. And so, thankfully, I think due to the fact that we are a very small organization, small staff size, thanks in part to a lot of careful financial management prior to the pandemic, and critically, thanks to a very forward-thinking public-private partnership with the city and the Office of Arts and Culture here in Seattle, we had the space to reimagine our mission, to reimagine our programming, for sure, bring a lot of things online, invest in virtual programming, also spend some of the downtime investing in researching what we needed to upgrade our very old facility and make it safe for a hopeful eventual return to folks. And then, as we mentioned and was sort of the focus of our case study in this report, we were able to reimagine our mission in a totally different way and become a funder. And we did that through a program called the Seattle Artists Relief Fund, through which we were able to raise from our community, public, private philanthropy, and most critically, just individual donors, many of whom were artists themselves, contributed to this ginormous mutual aid effort that wound up raising and distributing over $1.1 million to individual artists in our state. The heart of that was knowing that arts organizations have no raison d'etre without artists. And so knowing that every artist in certainly our spheres and seemingly across the state lost most, if not all, of their work, all of their opportunity to earn an income creating and sharing their art due to the pandemic closures and cancellations. We knew that we all needed to do our part to keep the heart of our, heart and soul of our community going. And so we were able to provide 21 to 2,200 artists a lifeline, short-term temporary emergency cash assistance, just to help them get groceries, get medicine, get childcare, get them through the next couple of weeks. When we started this effort, we thought that it would be just a stopgap measure until we could get larger public funds or private philanthropic efforts up and running and let the professionals take over. And what we found is that a lot of the folks who we thought would be able to do that just weren't able to pivot fast enough. Great programs emerged at the end of 2020 into 2021, but folks who needed help in March, April, May, June, July of 2020, and I'm grateful that we were able to provide some of that. 2021 was another rough ride, back and forth, kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back with reopening. What kind of PPE do we need to invest in? What kind of air filtration systems do we need to get for our facility? What capacities can we bring people in? Who will even want to come sit inside with strangers again? Omicron emerging towards the end of last year was another kind of kneecap moment where a lot of plans went out the window. We've had, as of this week, 5 programs canceled for the first part of 2022 due to Omicron and concerns around artist safety and due to folks getting coronavirus. And so the uncertainty of the last 2 years has not abated at all. And we find ourselves still struggling to plan for next week, let alone the rest of our fiscal year. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Tim. We are going to turn to a future question in a moment. But before I turn to that, I'd love to ask each of the panelists, I'll ask each of you a specific question so we're able to touch upon more topics. And this is sort of a very present moment question for each of you. I'll start with you, Amada. What does it mean to be an arts institution whose mission is connecting art to life when you are having to provide that connection virtually?
Yes, that is the question. So when we did close, it actually, there was a sort of existential question that we were facing. Because art museums in particular are all about providing authentic experience with actual works of art in real life in our spaces, which we take a lot of care over. We really had to ask ourselves what we were and what purpose we had if we could not make that physical and experiential connection. How do we do that online? So this sort of sense of purpose and shared purpose that we had was sort of being frayed by the pandemic. How do you keep everybody focused on the reason that they really joined the museum staff, let's say, and even for the board? How do we all stay connected when our whole reason for being affiliated with this organization is really being questioned? So that was a very fundamental issue that we were facing. We found that we did whatever we could do online, and we did actually find that we had a lot of participation, and I know that everybody else on the screen did as well, so that was a really magic moment. But looking forward, once we actually reopened after being closed for six months, I still can't even believe it. My fear was that no one was going to come back, that people were going to forget the value of that experience, that authentic experience, that people were going to be nervous about being in the same room, even though we have very large spaces. So I have to tell you, I was incredibly happy when we finally opened the doors after 6 months and people showed up, wrote to us, responded, and let us know that they were in fact happy to be back at the museum and really were looking for that sense of human connection. So it was a relief, but a very tricky time for all of us.
Thanks, Amada. And I think that point that you just raised is also underscored by some of the cultural participant data and the general public poll in the study about the value that people realize that they place on arts and culture, to some degree, increasing even now, realizing once the absence of it in their lives, how much more important it is than we ever even thought. I'd like to turn to Tim. We are short on time, but I do want to ask a follow-up question. What are your greatest concerns for the cultural landscape in Washington, and more specifically for BIPOC organizations and artists as we enter year 3 of the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. I think my concerns are the same for the entire ecosystem, and just doubled in urgency for BIPOC organizations, as Michael alluded to. Our organizations were already in crisis mode, and I think that, speaking broadly to the sector, particularly to BIPOC organizations, we're still in crisis mode. We're maybe getting a little bit more used to it, but that's come at a great cost. And I think other folks have already spoken to this. The level of exhaustion, the level of burnout, the limited, the uncertainty of when and how this period in our lives is going to end has caused a lot of folks to leave the field altogether, has caused a lot of arts organizations to seriously, for the first time in many cases, consider whether or not they can remain open. And more critically, for arts workers, cultural workers across the for-profit and nonprofit sides of our ecosystem, many individual artists are having to find work elsewhere and walking away from their creative careers just to make ends meet. And so I think that my greatest concerns are that if we don't have the support we need to sustain our organizations to keep the businesses open that are providing paid work for individual artists, our artists and our culture workers generally won't be here on the other side of this crisis.
I'm silenced by that. I have no segue. Monique, I'd love to ask you also just quickly before we turn to the future. You touched upon this in your opening remarks about what the young people you work with are thinking and needing and requesting. So is there anything, can you share a bit more about what teens are needing or doing right now with respect to arts and culture in today's conversation?
Yes. So at TeenTix, we've seen teens handle life and learning in a variety of ways since lockdown. And socially, it really seems like a lot of young people are just still looking for ways to engage with one another, whether that's in person or online. And I think because school has looked different for them for like such a long time, they just currently seem more inclined to attend activities in person, even more so than they did a year ago. But a lot of teens have actually realized that with virtual attendance, they're able to participate more fully in a variety of activities because they don't have to worry about navigating transportation. Super big hurdle for everybody. And we've actually at TeenTix seen an increase of teens who live outside of our area participating in our regular programming, even globally, just due to the availability of virtual access. And that kind of can be a big deal to get out of your neighborhood and attend different events. So I really think that teens are looking for that connection to friends and new activities outside of their home and even beyond the screen. And they do seem more receptive to COVID protocols and requirements than other age brackets. So I wonder if they feel more secure because they and their peers tend to acknowledge one another's personal safety and safety choices. Another thing I just wanted to mention I'm focusing on right now is that teens, especially older teens, have had a limited exposure to some of the career development opportunities that they would otherwise have experienced, such as internships or entry-level jobs or volunteer opportunities. And at TeenTix, we've received an increase in requests for teens to earn volunteer hours and an increase in applications for our internships that we post. So I really just think we need to find a way to invest more deeply in these career development opportunities for our young people. And lastly, I just want to say that like a shout out to my youth development colleagues who work in arts programming, because we've all just been working overtime to make sure that you still have programming to participate in within the arts. And arts is a medium teens know and they love, and they've continued to request opportunities to really process social movements via this arts lens. And they've relied on orgs to make their forward thinking and adaptive ideas a reality. So youth dev organizations just have not had a break, and arts and culture is such a critical component of our lives, and it's been leaned on really heavily during the pandemic. So that I'm going to stop there for now. I know we're short of time.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you for surfacing all those points. And thanks to all of you who are putting your questions in the Q&A box. We are about to open up for the broader question and answer session. Before we do, panelists, I have one final question for each of you. We probably have a minute for each of your answers. How is all of this, the lessons, the experiences of the past years, preparing you for decision-making and planning for a much more volatile and unpredictable future, and what we can now acknowledge is the inevitability of future shocks? Let's start with Tim, then Monique, then Amada.
Thanks. I mean, I think that we've kind of gotten over the idea of returning to any kind of quote unquote normal. And in planning for the future, it's planning for, you know, every imaginable future in the multiverse, you know, and trying to figure out how to advance programming with the knowledge that the rug could get pulled out from under us at any point. And so, you know, definitely increasing our capacity to find funding that's not tied to earned revenue, to not have to rely on ticket sales or, you know, other contributed earned program revenue to keep things moving, and then really doubling down on our efforts to meet community needs where it is. Maybe putting on another show is not what our community needs the most right now, and so how can we reimagine our programming? How can we reimagine our mission and sort of manifest our vision of cultivating Black brilliance off our stage? And so that's where we're putting a lot of our thought right now, is figuring out non-producing presenting opportunities to serve up some of this Black brilliance.
Thanks, Tim. Just jump in here. So I'm thinking about this in a multitude of ways, but I'm going to keep repping the youth lens here. So doubling down on things that are working right now. Youth are showing up for programs, and we are finding ways to keep engaging them, even virtually, with teens who might feel burnt out in other areas of their lives. And to me, that really means leaning back and to keep letting youth take the lead and to keep checking in with them on what they need right now, because it's changing every day for them, like school, after school activities, sports, homework requirements, and not to mention their like quote unquote passion activities, whether it be like TeenTix or Totem Star, Penguin Productions, Red Eagle Soaring, Youth in Focus, like the list just goes on. And teens have a lot of great programming opportunities available to them here. And just briefly, another thing I'm thinking about is how to engage young people in our current staffing structure because of the lack of opportunities that they've had you know, within their environment because of COVID restrictions. So how to bring them more closely into the TeenTix like general operating and program implementation fold. So
I'm inspired by the two of you, so thank you. I don't feel like I have too much to add, but I was writing notes about, you know, how do we all institutionalize flexibility and uncertainty? Because that seems like contradiction, but I think that's what we're facing now. You know, one of the things that was positive about this is the closure sort of reinforced this idea of looking internally and focusing on what we were doing with our staff and with our board, and so the equity work that I know all of you have been doing for so long. Focusing on that has become very important. So we do things like paid internships for youth now. You know, we weren't always able to do it, but we were able to really raise the money for that kind of thing. You know, so really looking inwardly and trying to make some positive changes in that way, as well as also questioning ourselves about what we need to do to be able to respond to this moment for our audiences. You know, reinstalling some very traditional art galleries to bring in other voices and have different communities, representations from communities of color, advises on how to do it, be part of the process, be represented. So a lot of that sort of questioning of everything that perhaps seemed normal before, because we're not in, you know, what is normal at this point. We need to really think about that.
Thank you, Amada, and thank you all for all you've shared so far. Now is the time when I will open up the proverbial Zoom floor, fuzzy slippers and all, to questions from all the participants today. And I invite Melissa Huggins and Michael Greer to rejoin the stage, the Zoom room. And thanks to all who've submitted the questions thus far. We have a question that I think touches upon a number of you, which essentially says, it's touching upon some of how the government funds may have been pandemic specific and may not continue moving forward. So the question is, what sources of funding are you looking to help continue to mitigate the cost of keeping staff and audiences safe? And/or what other investments have you made that continue to keep all of us safe? Maybe Amada, since you've got venues open, we'd be a good place to start with you, and then maybe we'll go from there.
Yeah, when the pandemic first hit, we actually had daily meetings at 10 a.m. to talk about nothing but pandemics, because none of us had any idea what that was. And so we continue to really think about that. Again, just being really flexible. We continue to raise money from every source we can possibly find. Our sweet spot is really individual giving and raising money from foundations and from individuals. So very, very grateful for that support, and we'll certainly continue that. In terms of keeping people safe, we have big spaces, but we monitor attendance very carefully. So if we need to, we shut down attendance, we cut back, we close galleries if we need to because they're too tight. It's just this constant vigilance. And of course, you have to have a vaccine to come into the building, you have to wear a mask, all of that. So just lots of vigilance.
Does one of the other panelists want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. In late 2020, we commissioned a feasibility study and reopening report to see what our facility needed to reopen safely for folks in the then pre-vaccine era of the pandemic, and critically what other small scale renovations we needed to make the work better and easier generally. And we've sought some funding, we've sought definitely deeper engagement with our partners at the city to invest in some critical infrastructure here. In terms of funding, it's we're all chasing the same dollars. It's a combination of seeking other pre-COVID funding programs from federal and state public sources, looking for new individual donors, definitely building stronger relationships with private foundations, and it's kind of the same hustle that we were all in pre-pandemic, chasing whatever opportunities we can find, with the added expenses of PPE and somebody at the door to check vaccine status, and extra hours for the folks to clean the facility before and after events. And so the costs have gone up, and the hustle to raise those funds continues.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to expand that question to build upon it for one that came in for Melissa. And the question about a specific organization that asked the question, survived through generous donations from members and government grants, keeping staff employed and making major improvements to the facility. Now that their government funding has gone or is going, how do rural arts organizations continue to survive?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question of the hour, right? I mean, I think there are a number of recommendations in the report that sort of relate to that question. I wish that I had a quick answer that is the silver bullet to how we solve this massive structural problem. I mean, I think we do. Part of it is continuing to advocate for more public funding, which is, one of the primary recommendations in the report. And we know that our state has received, a massive influx of federal dollars to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic, and that our state budget has a significant surplus. And so I think there's a big opportunity to use data like this to tell our story to elected leaders and convince them that this is the time to make a really historic investment in arts and culture. To me, that seems like the most feasible path because of what Tim said, which is all of the other sources, we have been pursuing and in conversation with for many, many years before the pandemic. So I think the public investment piece is really crucial, and that that's what we should work toward.
Thanks, Melissa. That segues into a question that's come in for Michael. What long-term changes can the sector and its supporters make to safeguard against future unforeseen impacts?
Thanks, Sarah. And I want to follow up really quickly on that, Melissa and Tim's comment about this idea that not only do we need to support and expand this idea of public funding as part of kind of future looking, but we need to make sure that that public funding is future looking. A lot of what we have experienced and received over the past 2 years has been grounded in relief, which has been point in time or perhaps even a little bit backward looking, kind of backfilling. But we need to be looking at programs that are forward looking in terms of 2, 3, 5 years out, because that is the length of recovery and reimagination that we're really going to need to reimagine the sector in the future. And so what do we need to be doing? One, we need to have part of one of the last recommendations that we had was this idea that this is going to be a long-term recovery, and we need to be structuring our advocacy and our planning around not 3, 6, 9 months, but around 2, 3, 5 years forward. And we need to be advocating for the funding that will support that moving forward. And in addition, I think we need to really focus on that kind of first recommendation in terms of reimagining the role within our communities. So as Tim mentioned a little bit earlier, is it another program? Is it another way of engaging with our communities? But how is it that we really, as a sector, integrate the benefits of arts and culture into the everyday lives of everyone in our communities, and make it so that when you think of arts and culture within your community, it's not just going to a venue or going to see a show. It's part of a daily engagement that you have with the organizations and with arts and culture specifically.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you all for joining us today. We have very limited time left. And so panelists and Michael, apologies, I am putting you on the spot by asking you, this report that we're releasing and sharing with all today really looks back at what has happened and looks forward to what is to come. And if you were to summarize what you're thinking right now about that moment in time, looking back and looking forward with a single word, which I'm sure Lo, our ASL interpreter, will appreciate, single word, what are you thinking right now? I'll let you go in whatever order a word pops to your mind.
I'll go ahead and start to give everyone a second to think, but I think it's opportunity. There's opportunity in change, there's opportunity in the future, and we have an opportunity to further ground arts and culture in our communities.
I'll go next. I think my word is responsibility. We have a responsibility to care for one another as you know, members of this community. And I think that whether we're talking specifically within the context of arts and cultural nonprofits as we are today, or just by and large, you know, across the city, across the sector, there's a huge percentage of our workforce, a huge percentage of our kids, of our neighbors that are engaged in careers in arts and culture, who are, you know, wonderful to have as friends and neighbors and family, and we need to take care of one another and find new ways to do that better.
I would say collective. I mean, I think that we haven't really fully shown the power that we have as a sector if we really all come together and rally for these priorities that are, you know, sort of illustrated in the report.
I have two. First word I thought of was hope. I think this is actually a hopeful moment because this will end at some point. But the other thing I was going to say is advocacy. It is, I think, really our time to be loud and to advocate for why the arts are important and to get people to think differently about them. They're not luxuries. The arts are crucial to a healthy society. They're crucial to a healthy state, to a healthy city. They spur innovation. They cause us to look at the world differently and question our assumptions and move forward. So I think it's up to us to really advocate for the arts, each one of us.
Second all of those words, and I'm going to add feeling of renewal or renewed. I don't know where it's coming from, but I'm just feeling like ready to make some change and kind of stop waiting around and do something for young people in our community. And I want to act. Yeah, so that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you all. Michael, please close us out.
Thank you, everyone. I'll be brief in closing, but I do want to remind you that you can download the study in full on our website. And I'd just like to close by saying thank you to our panelists, to our funders and our financial supporters, and to all of you that have joined us today. ArtsFund is only as strong as the community that we represent. There are hundreds of you here today, and you all represent thousands more in our community and beyond that believe in the power of arts and culture as a tool for change and improving the quality of life in our communities. Thank you for believing in our mission and for living that mission in everything that we do. So in closing, please share this report with others in your circle of influence, advocate for these recommendations wherever and whenever you can, and above all else, support the artists and the organizations that make this possible. They are key to what make our communities places that we want to live. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful rest of the day.